The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
One of the things that you had mentioned to me was that this docuseries, which I guess is just called The Yogurt Shop. I think that's
the Yogurt Shop Murders.
That docuseries actually shows some of the investigators arriving on scene that night, right?
Correct. There, for some random reason, there was a film crew they were filming for something that had absolutely nothing to do with the Yogurt Shop Murders. They were just getting footage, and that footage is shown. I mean, it doesn't show I think it does show a little bit inside, but it doesn't show anything too graphic. But it just so happened that the night that this horrible crime happened, there was a film crew with the lead, who ended up being the lead detective at the beginning of the case.
One of the interesting things that happened in the late 1980s is we started a lot of new documentary reality series that had to do with the courts and that had to do with law enforcement. And one of those huge things that happened was the television show Cops. And so Cops had happened. It premiered March of 1989 and was a hit. In fact, it still technically is going today. There's been some breaks in the timing of it, but Cops is still around today. I did look up, and they were in Texas, but they were not near this at the time, because I was curious, would that have been Cops or something? Because Cops has had some really dramatic stuff happen sort of over the years.
I don't actually know if they may say it in the docuseries what they were filming. I don't know. But it wasn't anything that, if they did say it, I don't remember what they said.
Yeah, no, I just thought it was interesting that this is timed in 1991. So we've had a good 2 years for everybody to get kind of obsessed with Cops, and then America's Most Wanted is going to be coming out in there. We have a lot of people who get fascinated with the concept of this cinema verite style of documentary television. Because if I remember correctly, America's Most Wanted precedes Cops by a year maybe. And I think it came on maybe Saturday nights. I just thought that was interesting to mention here. Among other things, the timing of all this was kind of weird, because we get this docuseries called The Yogurt Shop Murders. It comes out in August 2025 on the streaming channel service HBO. And then now it's September 28th. And what's interesting about today's episode, timing-wise, is that it's just been solved, or it's been put out that the Yogurt Shop Murders in Austin, 1991, they have their primary suspect now. Now, where we left off, we had these 4 kids, 2 of which are convicted of this. And over time, we're going to find out a lot of interesting information about this case. And that's going to be that Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welborn ultimately have nothing to do with this. Or at least it seems that way, right?
They had nothing to do with it. I was sure of that just looking at the investigation. They were they weren't involved at all. And, the very worst thing I could hear right now from anybody is that they're still involved somehow.
Yeah, it would be terrible, because I had mentioned this statement by the Travis County District Attorney back in 2009. It was the summer of 2009 that she made the statement that like she was confident they were like this trial would eventually go forward, and they were concerned about this one unknown male donor. But she was confident that somehow Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were still involved. And I'm going to go ahead and, since we're getting through this probably in today's episode, I'm going to go ahead and put this out here. You've always thought that it was what?
One person.
Right. So you've always put down that this is a single perpetrator crime.
Right. And the reason that a single perpetrator was able to do this, which I guess might be a question somebody would have, is because they were young girls who were scared.
What's interesting about this is I had been confused somewhere along the way in what I had read about this. And the thing that had confused me was that there was DNA evidence. And I had one picture in my head that there were multiple contributors. But I think over time, what I've come to realize is that there's really only one important piece of DNA in all of this that like was a true, like the one unknown male, like person that was likely involved in this crime. So I had been confused thinking robbery gone wrong and like maybe two people, not these people that they put up on trial for this, but like two people come in and like that's how you get control of them. But I was already coming around to the idea that you had that it's one person, because a lot of these crimes, history is starting to show us they are like these unsolved pairs of murders and unsolved quadruple murders. They're frequently just one person.
Right. And so let's say in this situation, now there were two different kinds of bullets recovered, right?
Right.
And let's say that in this situation, it had been two people. The reason I was confident that it was just one is because if a crime like this were done by two people, one of them would have been the leader and one of them would have been the follower. And the follower would have confessed long before they made a DNA match all these years later, like 35 years later or whatever. Based on just what I knew about the crime itself and the aftermath, it only makes sense that it was one guy to me. And I'm amazed that investigators or prosecutors or officials, I guess, when they say, like, we're going to get everybody that was involved with this crime, it surprises me that they have the opinion that there could be a bunch of people involved in this crime, right?
Right.
It's weird. It's a weird thing to have that opinion. And it's pretty clear to basically execute 4 young girls. I have a feeling you might be right. It may come out that it was a robbery that went wrong, but that's not a great place to rob anyway, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be a high traffic area or a place with a lot of cash.
Right. And so, it may be a robbery motive, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure this was just meanness. It was a guy who was an asshole.
Where we land is on October 28th of 2009, the same district attorney, Rosemary Lemberg from the Travis County District Attorney's Office, she is going to drop all the charges against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. And information is going to dribble out over the next several years that they have a lot of false confessions in this case. In fact, Austin police will eventually say, which I think it's quoted in See How Small, which New York Times ran that at some point, and Somebody Has to Die. So See How Small, I think, was written by, it's either Scott Blackwood or somebody with the last name Kirk Walsh. That's what I had scribbled in the margins here. This is essentially talking about these yogurt shop murders. And then there's another article, Somebody Has to Die, by Jordan Smith, that comes out in 2001. Now, we're going to find out that, like, the Austin police had a hand in a lot of these false confessions. And one of the confessions comes in 1992 by two Mexican nationals who were held by Mexican authorities. And it takes some time, but we find out later on through a CBS News article that they did realize the confession made no sense and ultimately rule out these two people. But they have one interesting person. And, I can never let go of a good serial killer story. Person that we come to know about in the course of all this, he actually is going to confess to the yogurt shop murders. We've mentioned him in passing on some other stuff. I had looked at a series of crimes in several different Texas cities in the 80s that this guy might have been good for at one point. But we came up with this whole interesting idea from some of the summaries online where we could go back and look at him. Now, we've talked about one of these scenarios before, so I'm not going to go crazy with it. But this guy is Kenneth Allen McDuff. Now, he's raised in a Texas town called Rosebud. He's got a stack of brothers and sisters. His father is a successful businessman in the 60s. And there's their mom, Addie. So dad is John Allen, or J.A. Mom is Addie McDuff. And she had threatened a school bus driver with a gun after the driver kicked Kenneth McDuff's twin brother, Lonnie McDuff, off of the school bus. Now, Kenneth McDuff, and we've talked about him before, he was known as a bully. He was always picking on weaker individuals. He had lost a fight to an athletic boy named Tommy Salmons. And he ends up quitting school and going to work for his father's concrete business, just doing manual labor. We picked up on him basically having a criminal career and escalating what I would call pretty quickly to murder. So in 1964, when he was 18 years old, Kenneth McDuff, he gets 12 counts of burglary and attempted burglary, and it's going to span 3 Texas counties. If you've never driven through Texas before, Texas is huge. Each county is huge. So this spans a pretty huge jurisdictional circle. That's Bell County, Milam County, and Falls County. He ends up being sentenced to 12 4-year prison terms, and he is supposed to be serving those concurrently. That's in 1964. He makes parole in December 1965, in spite of having all these 4-year sentences. So he briefly gets put back in prison because he gets into a fight when he gets out. He doesn't really know how to live free, so to speak. He had not been convicted of anything at the time, but he has an accomplice that we talked about in the 1966 triple murder named Roy Dale Green. So according to Roy Dale Green, Kenneth McDuff had bragged pretty openly about having a serious criminal record, and he claimed at that time to have raped and killed 2 young women. On August 6th of 1966, the two of them, Roy Dale Green and Kenneth McDuff, they had gotten together that summer through some mutual friends. They spent the day pouring concrete at Kenneth McDuff's father's company. And then they went driving around, and Kenneth McDuff tells Green they're going to go looking for a girl. At 10 p.m., Robert Brand, his girlfriend Edna Sullivan, so Robert Brand is 17, Edna Sullivan 16, and Robert Brand's 15-year-old cousin, Mark Dunham, they were standing beside their parked car on a baseball field in Everman, Texas. So they're cruising around, and Kenneth McDuff notices Edna Sullivan. So they park about a football field length away from who were basically going to be their victims. And Kenneth McDuff threatens the trio with his .38 Colt revolver. He orders them to come over and get into the trunk of their car, and Roy Green is going to follow along in Kenneth McDuff's car. Kenneth McDuff drives the Ford along a highway, off into a field, and he orders Edna Sullivan out of the trunk. He instructs Roy Green to put her into the trunk of his Dodge Coronet. And at this point, according to Roy Dale Green, Kenneth McDuff said he's going to have to knock him off, and he fires 6 shots into the trunk of the Ford, despite Robert Brand and Mark Dunham begging not to be killed. So Kenneth McDuff then instructs Roydale Green to wipe down any fingerprints that are on the Ford. They drive to another location, and Kenneth McDuff and Roy Green end up sexually assaulting Edna Sullivan. After she had been assaulted repeatedly, McDuff asked Roydale Green for something which he could strangle her with, and Roy Green gives him his belt. However, McDuff opts to use a 3-foot-long piece of broomstick that he's got in the trunk of his car. He chokes Edna Sullivan, and then Green and McDuff dump her body in some bushes. According to Green, they go and get some Coca-Cola from a local gas station, and they drive to Roy Green's house to spend the night. The following day, Kenneth buries that gun beside Roy Green's garage, and their mutual acquaintance, Richard Boyd, allows Kenneth McDuff to wash his car at his house. The next day, Roy Green confesses to Richard Boyd's parents. Richard Boyd's parents tell Green's mom, and Green's mom makes him turn himself in. So finally, Kenneth McDuff gets arrested by Falls County Sheriff Albert Brady Pamplin and a deputy U.S. Marshal named T.P. McNamara. He ends up getting a death sentence for this crime, and he is going to be sent to the electric chair. Roy Green gets a 25-year sentence and is released in 1979. Along the way, Kenneth McDuff's death sentence gets commuted to a life sentence. He hires a lawyer. They go through and they get a massive amount of what looks like evidence together. And that lawyer claims that Roydale Green was the actual killer. So because they put on this fancy presentation, parole board members are impressed by the fancy presentation. And during a one-on-one interview with a board member, Kenneth McDuff offers him a bribe to secure a favorable decision on this parole application. He ends up getting 2 years for the bribe. But it's pointless because the board members still think that Kenneth McDuff can, quote, contribute to society again. So they decide to grant him parole. And in 1989, after having been sentenced to death for this 1966 murder, he gets out of prison. So Kenneth McDuff was one of 20 former death row inmates and 127 murderers that would get paroled from this area of Texas. After being released, he goes and works at a gas station. He's making a couple dollars an hour. He's taking a class at Texas State Technical College in Waco. Within 3 days of his release, he is widely believed to have begun killing again. The body of 29-year-old Seraphia Parker was discovered on October 14th of 1989 in a town called Temple, which is kind of down towards Waco. Kenneth McDuff doesn't get charged in this crime. However, he was soon returned to prison on a parole violation because he had made a death threat to what is described as an African-American youth over in Rosebud, Texas. So Addie McDuff, she pays $1,500 and expenses to 2 Huntsville lawyers in return for their evaluating Kenneth McDuff's prospect of release. And on December 18th of 1990, Kenneth McDuff is again released from prison. On the night of October 10th, 1991, he picks up a sex worker named Brenda Thompson in Waco. He ties her up, but then stops his truck about 50 feet from a police checkpoint. When a policeman walks towards Kenneth's vehicle, she repeatedly, the woman's tied up next to him, kicks at the windshield of McDuff's truck, and she cracks it. So Kenneth McDuff accelerates very quickly. He drives at the officers, and according to a statement filed by the officers later, 3 of them had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. But the cops give chase. Kenneth McDuff is able to elude them by turning off his lights and riding the wrong way down one-way streets. Ultimately, he parks his truck in a wooded area near U.S. Route 84, and he's going to torture Brenda Thompson to death. Her body will not be discovered until 1998. 5 days later, on October 15th, 1991, Kenneth McDuff and a 21-year-old sex worker named Virginia Deanna Moore were witnessed arguing at a Waco motel. Shortly thereafter, the pair drive in Kenneth McDuff's pickup truck to a remote area beside Texas State Highway 6, which is down by Waco. He ties her arms and legs with stockings, and he kills her. She had been missing from home for 7 years by the time her body was discovered September 29th of 1998. He's also believed to have murdered Cynthia Renee Gonzalez, 23 years old. She was found dead in a creek bed near County Road 313 in a heavily wooded area 1 mile west of I-35 in September of 1991. She had only been missing for 6 days. Kenneth McDuff had an accomplice named Alva Hank Worley. They kidnapped and murdered Colleen Reed on December 29th of 1991. While McDuff and Worley were driving around Austin, they drove past an Austin car wash where Kenneth McDuff saw Colleen Reed. According to Worley, so again, the accomplice is talking, Kenneth stated he was going to kidnap her. He then pulled her into the car wash, parked behind her car wash bay, jumped out of the car, grabbed her by the throat, and pulled her into the back seat. And then he instructed for Alva Worley to take off. And all of this occurred in plain sight of multiple witnesses. Okay. So this guy is an honest-to-God, tried and true, very mean serial killer. He's going to take 2 more lives.
We actually talked about him before.
We have, yes. Which is why I was kind of like just getting to Austin and getting to 1991.
Right.
So the death of Colleen Reed it's thought to be 3 from the end. So essentially her death and then 2 more people. But her death takes place in December of 1991 in the Austin area. So the reason he's so interesting here is Kenneth McDuff has confessed to the yogurt shop murders. It's right before his execution, which to me says he's probably just making up a story to try and delay the inevitable. Would you agree?
I don't know. I mean, that's possible. It could also be that, like, because of the infamy surrounding that crime, trying to make a name for himself before he or as he's being executed.
Right.
Because none of his crimes, like, nobody knows who he is, right?
Right. Right. He's kind of nobody at the time.
Right. And I think that, so I'm not sure what he was doing.
Ultimately, Kenneth McDuff is going to end up being executed. He's indicted on 1 count of capital murder for the murder of a woman named Melissa Northrup. Her murder occurs March 1st, 1992. She had been kidnapped from a quick pack in Waco, Texas, where she was working. She had been strangled with a rope. She was pregnant at the time of her murder, and she was found in a Dallas County gravel pit with her hands tied behind her back. So June 26, 1992, he's found guilty. In Texas, juries determine whether or not an individual convicted of capital murder will receive life imprisonment or the death penalty. According to a journalist named Gary Cartwright, Kenneth McDuff is the one guy that should be executed. He would later say, quote, "If there has ever been a good argument for the death penalty, it's Kenneth McDuff." And on February 18th, 1993, the jury in a special punishment hearing opted to sentence him to death. There's several delays that are going to occur while appeals can be heard, and the Western District Court, so that's the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas, they're going to end up denying federal relief, and they're going to reschedule the execution date for Kenneth McDuff for November 17, 1998. He is denied authorization for a new date, but he does give up Colleen Reed's burial location just a few weeks before he's executed in 1998. He's been buried in the Joe Bird Cemetery, which is Peckerwood Hill. And I know we talked about that when it came up because there's no way I would have passed up that opportunity. But ultimately, this guy in 1998 has confessed to the yogurt shop murders. Spinning back over to the yogurt shop murders, we know that in October of 2009, They dropped the charges against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, part of the original four, the two men who had been convicted. Now, in December 2010, another one of those original four suspects, a guy named Maurice Pierce, he's going to make headlines. On December 23rd, 2010, an Austin police officer named Frank Wilson and his partner, Bradley Smith, who's a rookie, by the way, they conduct a traffic stop on a vehicle driven by Maurice Pierce in the northern part of Austin. After a brief pursuit on foot, Maurice struggles with Frank Wilson and removes a knife from his belt and allegedly stabs Officer Wilson in the neck. Wilson pulls out his gun and he shoots and kills Pierce. Now, Officer Frank Wilson will survive here, but this is just kind of a moment in time with the third of four suspects kind of meeting a terrible end. On December 8th of 2021, the House Judiciary Committee, so this is at the federal level, the United States House of Representatives, they passed legislation from Representative Michael McCall, who represents Texas's 10th congressional district. And this is going to give the families of cold case victims the opportunity to petition the federal government to re-examine cases older than 3 years. So basically, all cold cases can be handed off to a federal agency to be looked at. February 5th, 2022, it was announced that advanced DNA technology had brought investigators in Austin closer than ever to solving the 1991 Austin yogurt shop murders. So August 3rd, 2022, the then President Joe Biden signs into law the Homicide Victims Family Rights Act of 2021. This was actually motivated by the 1991 yogurt shop murders. The law was intended to help ensure that federal law enforcement would review cold case files and apply the latest technologies or investigative standards, or both. The law also states that a request can be made for a cold case review by federal agencies. So families could do this and local law enforcement agencies could do this. We're now in 2025. The Yogurt Shop Murders has come out as a 4-part documentary series on HBO. Multiple 2023, 2024, 2025 true crime sources have talked about these murders. And these murders never really go out of the public eye. But in September 2025, on the 26th, it's formally announced that they have identified a suspect through investigative genetic genealogy. Cece Moore is going to point out that back in 2018, they had linked a suspect to the yogurt shop murders through DNA. A partial YSTR DNA profile was developed from a vaginal swab from one of the victims. The profile did not match any of the previous suspects. However, what they were able to do was they got enough of a Y-DNA STR profile to get a partial match to sort of push the investigation further down the road. They were able to find on a bullet casing, which was in a drain at the crime scene, so at the yogurt shop, it shared similarities with a gun that was known to have been used in a suicide that occurred during a standoff with police back in 1999. Now, this is always fascinating to me. I always wonder, where the details and the information comes from. Now, with this particular case, we get an article from 48 Hours. It comes out September 26, 2025. I'm going to read some of this, and then we're going to talk about this guy. It says, bullet casing and drain at Texas yogurt shop links serial killer to infamous murders, says original investigator. This is written up by Stephanie Slifer for 48 Hours, which is a CBS News subsidiary, I guess would be the word. It says 48 Hours correspondent Aaron Moriarty has learned a suspect has been identified in the 1991 murders of 4 teenage girls in an Austin, Texas yogurt shop. This is according to one of the original investigators. The suspect is a serial killer and rapist who committed at least 3 murders between 1990 and 1998 in South Carolina and Missouri. He died in 1999 by suicide during a standoff with police. The gun he used to shoot himself is believed to be consistent with a bullet casing found in a drain inside the yogurt shop. So the connection between the suspect and this case has been made through DNA. According to this article, Aaron Moriarty has been reporting on the yogurt shop case since the very beginning. So who we get out of this is a person that isn't on the radar for any of this. Very little is known about his early life. We have a date of birth for him. We know he was born March 13th of 1958 in Newport News, Virginia. He was the youngest of 2 kids, and then I've seen one summary say 2 living children who were born to Dulles and Nancy Brashers. When he was young, the family moved to Huntsville, Alabama, where he would spend his childhood and youth. The suspect reportedly had no problems with the law during his teen years. He did not use drugs or alcohol. And after graduation, he enlisted in the Army and served in the Navy for several years. In the early 1980s, the suspect resigns from the Army. He moves to Louisiana and settles into a house down in New Orleans. But by the mid-1980s, he moves one more time over to Fort Myers, Florida. He had gotten married and he had a daughter with his wife in 1991. That suspect is a man named Robert Eugene Brashers. Now, I've heard of him. I had never seen him linked to as much stuff as he is now being linked to. Had you heard of him before?
I'd never heard of him before.
So here's the story that we get about some of his crimes. In the fall of 1985, he gets arrested down in Florida. He gets arrested on charges of assaulting a 24-year-old woman named Michelle Wilkerson. Now, we can read about this all the way back in 1985. There's an article by Roger Mullen for the Palm Beach Post, and it's simply titled, "Woman Shot in Head Escapes Attacker." According to investigators, on November 22nd, Robert Brashers met Michelle Wilkerson in Fort Pierce and convinced her to accompany him to a bar. After spending their weekend there, he took Michelle Wilkerson to a dark alleyway near a citrus grove, where after they drank 6 Budweisers together, he attempted to make sexual advances toward her. Michelle refused and attempted to leave, and after she tries to leave, a fight breaks out between the two of them. And for some reason, during this fight, Robert Brashers shoots Michelle Wilkerson twice in the neck and the head. Despite the severity of her injuries, Michelle Wilkerson remains conscious. She manages to leave the car. She hides in a culvert under the road. And Robert Brashers, having lost track of her, he goes to the beach and he throws his gun away. He then attempts to leave, but he gets his truck stuck in the sand, and he has to get out and start walking. So he's basically walking along, trying to figure out a way to get his truck out of the sand or find someone who can help him do that. But in the meantime, Michelle Wilkerson has made her way to freedom. She gets to a nearby apartment building, and they give her medical attention. So she's going to end up being driven to Lawnwood Hospital, but she's able to describe her assailant and his car in detail. So a few minutes later, Robert Brashers is apprehended while wandering the beach, and he gets charged with attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery, and using a firearm during the commission of a crime. He's convicted the following year, and he's sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. So at the time, he's going to get a lot of good conduct credit or good time, and he's going to be released May 4th of 1989. So that's not a super long time to do in prison for this level of assault, on which you basically were supposed to be doing 12 years. After he's released from prison, he bounces around. He bounces from South Carolina to Tennessee to Georgia. He frequently changes his residence. On February 18th, 1992, he's arrested in Cobb County, Georgia. So that's about 2.5 months after the yogurt shop murders.
Right.
He's charged with grand theft auto, unlawful possession of a weapon, and theft. While police are searching his vehicle and apartment, they find a radio scanner, a police jacket, lock-picking tools, and a fake Tennessee driver's license. So, fearing another prison sentence, he makes a plea deal. The prosecutors set it up where he can plead guilty to the most serious of the charges, and the rest of them are going to be dropped. As a result, he gets 5 years imprisonment. He serves that in full, and in February of 1997, he gets out. So for the next 2 years, 1998, 1999, he moves between Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri. On April 12th of 1998, he was arrested while attempting to break into the home of a woman in Paragould, Arkansas. He had been employed by her on a previous occasion, and he cut the wires leading up to her home. So basically, he's trying to keep her from having an alarm or her phone. And he was armed at the time of his arrest. In addition, they found a video camera and locksmithing tools on his person. So he's taken into custody, but apparently released after his bail is unsecured or someone posts his bail. On January 13th, 1999, police officers notice a stolen vehicle that's been parked in the parking lot of a Super 8 hotel in Kennett, Missouri. After speaking with motel personnel, it's established that Robert Brashers, and apparently his family, had arrived in that vehicle just days earlier. So officers break down the door to the motel, and they find him hiding under a bed with a loaded gun. They try to drag him out and arrest him. He resists them, and he opens fire. So those officers end up retreating and calling for backup. Within a few minutes, the motel grounds are surrounded with police cars, and Robert Brashers takes his wife, his daughter, and his 2 stepdaughters hostage. After 4 hours of negotiation, he releases the 4 hostages, and then he shoots himself in the head. He's going to be alive for 6 days, and on January 19th, he is going to die from complications of the self-inflicted gunshot wound. This death is going to be ruled a suicide. So I have not heard that much about him. This is kind of his story. Where he comes into play for me is Cece Moore, which I think everybody knows who that is, but she's a prominent American genetic genealogist and investigator who right now is working, I think, out of Paragon Nanolabs. She does a lot of work in identifying connective DNA to crime scenes. She's going to pluck him from obscurity in 2018. She is able to identify him through working on him as a suspect in 3 murders and several rapes that date back to 1990. So prosecutors from New Madrid County, and which is located in kind of the boot hill of the state of Missouri, and Pemsicott County, which is located alongside close to New Madrid. They file a motion to exhume Robert Brashers' remains and conduct additional testing. On September 27, 2018, his casket is exhumed. They extract DNA from his bones. That DNA testing is going to reveal that he's a perfect match for unknown DNA that was at the crime scene of a 1990 rape and murder. This is a 28-year-old woman named Genevieve Zitricki, who went by Jenny. She had been bludgeoned, raped, and strangled with pantyhose at her apartment in Greenville, South Carolina, April 5th of 1990. At the time, it had been established that after murdering her in the bedroom, the killer had dragged her body into a bathtub and submerged it. And for some reason, on the bathroom mirror, he had written, "Don't fuck with my family." So they get a DNA sample from that scene, and it ends up not being isolated for 5 years. But they're going to upload it in 1995 to CODIS. So investigators were able to kind of go backwards in time and establish that at the time of Jenny's murder, Robert Brashers had been living in Greenville, South Carolina, not very far away from her. DNA also is going to link him to the double murder of 38-year-old Sherry Shearer and her 12-year-old daughter Megan, both of whom had been found shot to death March 28th, 1998, in their home in Portersville, Missouri. Both victims had been tied up, and Megan had been raped before Brasher shot and killed both of them. And guess what kind of gun he used?
A 22.
Yep, a 22 caliber weapon. So 2 hours later, it was determined that he had then broken into another home in Dyersburg, Tennessee, where he attempted to assault a 25-year-old woman. That victim resisted in a way that he flees. And basically, we don't know exactly what happened there, but she gets rid of him.
She also gets shot.
There was no useful biological evidence left behind, but ballistics were able to prove that the same gun he had been using in this attack had been used with the murders of the Shearers.
She got shot in the arm, like through the door. She managed to get the door shut, but she got shot in the arm. And that's where
the bullet that links it?
I think so.
Okay. So he's then linked to the March 11th, 1997 rape of a 14-year-old girl in Memphis, Tennessee. And in that case, the victim and 4 other people were inside a home when Robert Brashers knocked on the door, forced his way inside while armed with a revolver, and after entering, he tied up the occupants. It's all sounding pretty familiar at this point, right?
Yeah.
So it was determined on September 26, 2025, it's released that Robert Eugene Brashers is the perpetrator of the 1991 Austin yogurt shop murders. So a partial YSTR DNA profile was developed from a vaginal swab from one of the victims. Now, that profile did not match any other suspect. However, Brasher's YSTR DNA profile was enough of a partial match that that's how we start tracking him. And testing of a bullet casing found in a drain at that crime scene is going to be consistent with patterns produced by the gun that Robert Brashers had used to commit suicide in the standoff with police in 1999. So he kept this little 22 caliber weapon this whole time.
That's crazy, right?
It is. There's not a lot about him other than what I just kind of ran through there. His daughter gives an interview in February 2019 when she's recounting details of her father's life. She says that she first saw him in early 1997 after he had just been released from prison. According to her, the next 2 years he lived with her, her mom, and her 2 half-sisters. During this time, she claimed he was sometimes aggressive towards them. He fought the stepfather once and caused a head injury with a drill. Most disturbingly, he had made a tape recording of himself making small cuts on his neck and arm with a saw to see if he could withstand the pain. She was inclined to believe that her mother, Dorothy, who died in December 2018 at the age of 53, so that's going to be Dorothy Brashers, Robert Brasher's wife, that she knew about her father's past activities, and she had told them to start calling him by a different name and to keep him inside the house. In addition, she claimed that Robert Brasher's mental health sharply deteriorated at sometime in April of 1998, and that his job at a construction firm led to him being absent from the house for a few weeks at a time. During these periods, it is possible he may have committed additional rapes and murders. Okay, so that's a lot of information about a guy that we really didn't know anything about, right?
He is a true serial killer.
Yeah, he is a serial killer, and he does the thing at the end that you kind of expect from a decompensating serial killer, and that is he kills himself.
Right. And I just want to point out, I thought of it while you were talking. I wonder if... Did you say that he was put in jail in February of
1992, right after.
He was put in jail then?
Right after it happened, yeah.
And how long was he in jail at that point? Do you remember?
Well, so February of 1992 is the stuff down in Georgia. He gets the 5-year sentence, and he gets out February of 1997. So by the time he gets out on that crime, so it's like when he gets arrested, it's right after the yogurt shop murders. Like it's February 18th, like 2.5 months later.
Well, the reason I was asking is because he was in jail on September 24th, 1992, right?
Yes.
Okay, because that's when Dale Denwittle went missing in South Carolina.
Oh, yes.
And so I was thinking about that situation, but he was in jail. So because this is where, like we've talked about, this guy comes out of nowhere. There's DNA evidence linking him to all these sort of random unsolved crimes, right?
Right.
And that is what happens, over time. Like the only thing that's going to show up over time, because without DNA, he's just getting away with all this, right?
Yeah.
But I thought of that, but then I thought I remembered he went to jail. But I would not be surprised if there are more cases. I don't know if he didn't murder them. I don't know how many sexual assaults might have gone unreported.
So they upload his DNA, and the DNA that he hits on is in the first case that I saw was Ginny Zatricki. That's the April 5th, 1990 case. There's a DNA, an unknown male DNA that is uploaded in 1995, and that is going to end up linking him, Robert Brashers, to her murder, among the other murders that we were talking about.
Right. And so the yogurt shop DNA must not have been put into CODIS until later.
I don't think they could because it was a partial profile. I think they ended up having to work that one backwards.
Well, they were talking about how as the technology advanced, they were finally able to get, they were able to exclude, and they were able to do more things. I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to see if I can follow it and figure out the exact order
match that they made.
Well, the exact order that it occurred in, because it kind of gets all jumbled, right?
It does. It's kind of confusing. It almost sounds to me, and I could be totally wrong on this speculation I'm about to expound on you here, but I think they were experimenting with partial profiles, and his was more than the average partial, so they put it in, and it led them to either the yogurt shop or vice versa.
Right, but so in 1998, from the Sherry and Megan Scherer rural home murders.
Yeah.
A partial DNA profile was developed at that time, but it lacked the markers to enter into CODIS. So
right.
I don't know at that point in time what was required. Probably 12 or something. I'm not really sure, but it didn't come up enough to put it in there. And the reason for that is the less markers you're comparing, the more people it's going to match. Right?
Right.
Okay. And so there's some markers that, the whole point is that over time, people who specialize in this have been able to say okay, these are always different in people, and they point to certain markers, and that's how you can be certain of a DNA match, right? As opposed to the markers where you're going to be matching half of CODIS. It's not helpful, right?
Right.
But so that couldn't be in. Let's see. And then from that same case, because of significant advances in DNA, from Megan and Sherry, the mom and daughter that were sexually assaulted and murdered, it was re-entered.
Right.
And that was when they were able to get a full suspect DNA profile. And that is him. We know that now, right?
Right.
But it goes in and it matches the murder of Genevieve, right?
Correct.
Okay, and that's in Greenville, South Carolina, on April 6, 1990. So they immediately know that the same person's responsible for the murder in 1990 and two murders in 1998 in Missouri, I think, Portageville, Missouri.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
and so we know that in 2006 his full DNA profile is in CODIS, and it's I'm saying his full DNA as a perpetrator but unknown. Okay, so it's there, and it matches between two different crimes.
Right.
So at that point in time, if the yogurt shop DNA had been in CODIS, it would have shown up.
Right.
But it didn't.
Right.
Okay. I find that odd.
It is odd. I pulled an article that does not describe the yogurt shop murders. It describes these other connections that were being made. This is a quote from the Greenville News. It looks like it originally popped out on October 5th, 2018. The headline was, Greenville cold case solved. Ginny Zatricki killed by serial killer Robert Brashers in 1990. So again, this is 2018. It had some like interesting details in it that I wanted to include in this episode. I don't know how helpful they'll be to what you're talking about, but they talk about the 28 years it took to solve this. And then it says, I'm trying to see if this is, yeah, okay. So according to Ginny Zatricki's brother, who lives in New York, he attends this announcement. He said, "We remember her in life. She was a force of nature, a bundle of energy, an intelligent, vibrant, and caring human being." And this guy, Philip, is her brother. It says 28 years. 28 years. It's been a long time. It's been long enough for trails to go cold. This is according to Philip, addressing members of the media and state and local law enforcement leaders who are filling up this room for this press conference. He says, "We thank you for your persistence, your teamwork, and your zeal to proceed." Philip said he was always kept informed of the police department's progress through the years, but began to grow weary. Over the course of 28 years, there's some false starts. You start taking things with a little bit of a grain of salt. The police chief said some investigators who had already been retired were brought back in to work on this case. He said that the local police department worked tirelessly to find a suspect. One of the retired detectives, Banton, described the news of Robert Brasher's identity as a relief. He says, "We never gave up. Everybody kept trying to solve this. It's one of those cases you never let go." But then it says, with new DNA technology in the hands of law enforcement, investigators in Greenville are reviewing other cold cases to determine if evidence can be put through the same test. The cost of the Parabon service was about $4,500. So that's going to be paid by law enforcement over in Memphis. The Greenville Police Department paid to exhume Robert Brasher's remains from his gravesite. That cost about $1,300. And it describes Parabon in this 2018 article as combining comparative DNA analysis with traditional genealogy research known as snapshot DNA analysis. The type of genetic genealogy focuses on autosomal DNA single nucleotide polymorphisms, or DNA SNPs, that determine how closely two individuals might be related. Cases that were once believed to have grown cold may have new life. This is according to the police chief. He says authorities across state lines are taking a closer look at Robert Brasher's. Some of his potential crimes may still be unsolved. It's extremely possible there could be other cold cases or other sexual assaults. The police chief said that Robert Brasher's identity highlights the importance for police agencies to expedite testing of sexual assault evidence kits in the event their DNA matches that can link suspects to victims. And exact motives for Ginny Zatricki's killing is still undetermined, but Sergeant Tim Conroy said he believes Robert Brasher's may have preyed upon her as a target because she was outgoing. He said she would host pool parties at her apartment complex and often would allow partygoers to use her unit to use the bathroom. While Robert Brasher's suicide means he won't be held accountable for his actions through the criminal justice system, Sergeant Tim Conroy said investigators are still relieved to know he hasn't harmed anyone else since his death. None of these efforts can bring Jenny back. We can only hope that this day brings peace to her soul and peace to her family. And that's from Miller, the police chief out there. But I wanted to go over this list really quick. I wanted to go over this list just so we kind of knew it had been said. According to what we know of Robert Brasher's, he attempted to murder Michelle Wilkerson in November 1985 down in Florida. This is going to be Jenny Zetricky's murder we've just been talking about, and that's April 1990 in Greenville, South Carolina. He is now up for the 4 Austin yogurt shop murders. He has a rape of a 14-year-old March 11th, 1997. And then March 28th, 1998, he has an attempted assault and then the homicide of Megan and Sherry, the mother and daughter. I'm bringing all that up to say, if you guys want a rabbit hole going towards Halloween this year, this guy's the rabbit hole. Newspapers.com has all of these unsolved murders in there. In fact, one of the articles had some pretty interesting stuff about the murder of Jenny Zetricky. It had the sketches, and they've really specifically described what the police were looking for back then. They have sketches of the purported suspect in multiple different cases. He kind of looks like his mugshot ultimately, or like his driver's license picture. Not exactly. I just didn't think we could really skip and not talk about this guy, even though he's True Crime News. He had been on my list of serial killers to get into, and now that he is known to have committed the Austin yogurt shop murders, I'm like you. I want a timeline, and I want to see when he was incarcerated and where he was when.
Right, because so over time, it's interesting because of all the cases, it comes up that he committed a murder in South Carolina in 1990. And I'm able to recall a very specific case, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gotten down to that point, right? Where there's only so many cases that have no leads at all, right? Or they're long cold. And, obviously he was in jail, so he couldn't have abducted Dale Dinwiddle. But it is interesting how this pieces itself together. And I use information like this that comes up to check and see if I can figure out any of the gaps in
where he's unaccounted for?
No, the gaps in CODIS.
Oh, I got you.
Because essentially you initially have evidence matching, right? So it's linking crimes.
Right.
And eventually, now, granted, I don't know how apparent it is, but without DNA, Genevieve's case was never going to be solved.
Right. It was going to be a complete unknown whodunit.
Forever, right. In fact, most of the time, when you're looking this far later, and unfortunately, I have to say, I don't think we're going to have very many crimes that occurred before the mid-90s where the perp is still going to be alive. And I don't know why I think that, but I've thought that all along, along with the avalanche of DNA, it's been disappointing at how many are dead and they're not going to face justice, right?
Well, yeah, I'm not even on the face justice crowd as much as I hate lingering questions like these guys kind of create. And there's so many lingering questions that come from a deceased perpetrator who has committed this many crimes that we're aware of.
Well, right. And see, the interesting thing is with the yogurt shop murders, I'm not sure because of the nature of the crime. I'm not sure that they're not going to be able to say that, like, oh, it was just a casual encounter, right? I mean, these would have been underage girls working, right? As far as the DNA being found in the sexual
Right.
assault kit. And so he was there to, commit a terrible crime. And the mental health part that's been brought up, like, obviously, yes, this dude had issues, right? There's no question to do these kind of crimes. But he seems to be maybe an opportunistic serial killer.
Well, he's certainly got a thing for teenage girls.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that seems to be, I mean, just skimming through the list of 7 victims that are known, plus the attempted assaults, like, it seems to me, once you look at the yogurt shop murders, you can also see he has the attempted Memphis, Tennessee rape. That's a 14-year-old. Megan Shearer is 12 years old. He has a type here. Like, he is going after young, vulnerable girls.
So there probably wasn't a different motive. I do think that I think the 4 girls being in the yoga shop, I don't think he was planning on 4 girls being there. And I think because, 2 were working and 2 were there waiting for a ride home from the sister who was working, right? And so I think that threw him off. And I think that's why he started the fire.
That one, he gets away with it for 8 years, basically. And then he gets away with it in death until 2025. Apparently, they've just put it all together.
Well, right. And yeah, no, he totally got away with it. In fact, I wasn't especially after the docuseries came out, that crime was so horrific. It left almost like this indelible impression on that area. And honestly, a lot of it's one of the worst cases ever, right? Because there's 4 victims involved. And after the docuseries came out, I was thinking, because they've wobbled on the quality or the how much of a DNA profile they had, right? They've wobbled over the whole time. I know that, even during our 2 episodes of this, it's come up in various sources that there were more than one unknown DNA profiles, right? And so they've wobbled on it. And so until this happened, I was fairly certain that in the event they didn't get a full DNA profile, this case was never going to be solved, which was tragic because it left, the in-between perpetrators who were innocent, and eventually their sentences were overturned, but they've never been exonerated. It left them in sort of this limbo. Ultimately, and I do think that ultimately it's just the right people getting their hands on it, right? It's weird. I'm thinking to myself that
He brings up a really weird rabbit hole about CODIS.
well,
Because he should be in there for all these crimes he's committed.
but timing, but he died in 1999.
Correct.
And so I don't know when they started requiring a DNA sample, but the yogurt shop murders should have been linked by 2006.
At least to these other unsolved
That's what I'm
things,
saying.
That's the rabbit hole I'm going down is okay, say it's not in there with his name on it.
No, it should have met the evidence. One of the victim's sexual assault kits that yielded the full unknown DNA profile, male DNA profile, it should have been flagged in 2006 as a match to the other 2, Jenny's murder and Sherry and Megan's murders, right?
Right.
Okay, it didn't, which tells me that we're lucky that that profile got at all. Like it almost slipped through the cracks.
I think you're right. One of the things that comes out of this all for me and makes it so interesting is that fact that you just described. Like, there should have been cross-referencing done so that some of these unknown scenes, when they're entered into CODIS, they should have at least been linked to each other. Even if they're not linked directly to Brasher's till all this work gets done, they should have at least been linked to each other.
Right. And yeah, because once you start linking crimes together, it doesn't identify the perpetrator. However, it does start establishing, parameters you can look for in other situations that may not have DNA. But I'm still not entirely certain because it's my understanding that Brasher was ultimately identified through investigative genetic genealogy.
Correct.
Okay, well, so that means he wasn't in CODIS, right? Because if
Right.
it would have been just a match if he was in CODIS.
Right. I think it's a couple things. One, I think it's jurisdictional because this is all over the place. Like, we have so many states being linked together here. To link it back to Texas is weird because they didn't even say that they were looking at him for anything in Texas until much, much later. And what they end up getting down to is there has to be that break in the yogurt shop murders where they pull that DNA apart. And that's when they get the partial that they end up matching to him, which I think is ultimately done. And it doesn't say it in all of these like summaries and write-ups that are going on. I think it's ultimately done because someone, either CC Moore or someone else at Paraben, they have basically decided to figure out how to test partial matches. They end up getting his full DNA profile because of his link to the other crime 7 years before we're talking about this. So he gets on the radar, but then you have like this weird timeline that you have to develop that crosses many state lines, and you have to track what's his actual prison time versus his community corrections time, and you have to figure out when he's like actually in an area. So I think a case like this is complicated by a person like him. This is a straight up predator, which you and I have talked about being the rarest of the rare type of serial killer. This guy is it because he is a disorganized opportunity killer with some organized features. And he has a type that he's not linking from the perspective of like, it's not all happening in a nearby area. Like, a lot of times people freak out and go, there's a serial killer in Austin that pops up recently for us where men were being found in the same body of water.
Yeah, because they were drunk and they were walking into it.
Right. We don't really, but then at the same time, we've covered Jay Polhill's case. So we know that predators do operate like that. They just don't come back to the same location.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's what makes them, in many instances, the hardest type of predator to track is these serial killers that are geographically and jurisdictionally jumping around. And they're jumping around because they've been caught in one area and documented to a degree. And that would be something that, like, now, in addition to like these victims and like me looking at the gaps that, like, for instance, the gap between 1991 in December and February of 1992, he's out, he's about. What did he do in there? Did the yogurt shop killings like scare him in a way that like he slowed down? Obviously he kills again in February. Like, so like, how do we link those things together? But also, like, how do you get it to the point without like invading privacy where people like Robert Brasher, Kenneth McDuff, whoever, like, where we are sure we're able to put their DNA into CODIS. They're known serial killers. They have multiple victims. But also, how do we make sure that CODIS is cross-checking unknown DNA from unidentified perpetrators at unsolved crime scenes?
I also think that it's a little outrageous that I don't think that officials put the DNA profile in CODIS from the yogurt shop murder until like way, way later.
No, I think they're describing that to us. I think they're basically stating that Parabon getting involved is what allows them to sort out what eventually matches Robert Brasher's. Now, that's not even what they're saying is the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of declaring him here. It's the matching of the tool marks between the weapon at the yogurt shop scene and the scene of his 8 years later, 1999 suicide, which I think is another weird thing. He held on to this revolver for some reason.
And they were able to link it, right? So I'm thinking that I have no idea how ballistic matches work. I know they're not as reliable as DNA, but I was wondering after I saw that, like, is that the only thing that made them go, hey, could it be this dude?
I don't know how they get there. I assume like that's part of the special sauce that we have to figure out what they did and how to duplicate it.
Yeah, I surprised and astounded, but also not that part of the reason that this quadruple homicide took so long to solve was like because they didn't put the DNA in CODIS.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And it was also difficult to solve because, they had in their mind a set of suspects that didn't make a lot of sense, but they had decided that they did make sense.
Right, but don't you think that that's part of the reason why they wouldn't have put it in CODIS?
Could be.
This has been nothing. The yogurt shop murders, first of all, 4 young girls were heinously murdered, right?
Correct. Yes.
It was awful. And then there has been nothing but like this crazy squandering of resources to go after the complete wrong parties, right? And it's a little bit unbelievable. I think probably more so than anything, like the time that's passed is what shows it. But it's like they could have done nothing at all that whole time and still ended up in the same position now.
Yeah.
Instead of convicting 2 people who they then had to release because it was overturned on constitutional technicality grounds. I mean, not really a technicality, but sort of. But like, there was nothing coming up that they were actually innocent. They were saying that because they didn't get to confront their accuser, it wasn't fair that the jury convicted them, right? And that they had to have a new trial because of that. But they could have done absolutely nothing at all. And eventually, the DNA, once it was entered, it would have matched.
Yeah, it would have. Look, this is a story I would have rather had over 5 or 6 episodes and gone deeper into it. But then it was on my list, and I turned around and they made this announcement, and I was like, okay, well, we at least have to do part of that. I have another serial killer I was researching. I don't need to focus on this one.
What do you think the chances are of a case that is 34 years old, almost, having, I believe, the only docuseries that's ever been released about it, coming out in August of 2025, and the results of the DNA match coming out in September of 2025, when there's been 34 whole years for something to happen?
I mean, it's astronomical. The timing of the release. So look, if they're announcing now that it's him, they've known for a year. So it could be inside baseball that did it. Like somebody that had talked to CeCe Moore and Paramount for the docuseries knew that this was going to happen. And it's good timing for them in terms of popularity of their, like well-crafted and, it's a very difficult process to get something on streaming to begin with. So, the release itself could be timed ahead of this announcement.
I just find it like crazy odd
Yeah, it is odd. And like it is like in some ways I want to say it's kind of proof that like putting money into something is that's why I mentioned like the specific amounts they talk about 7 years ago, where like the cost of Parabon to analyze this one case is $5,000, and like to exhume a body is this much, and to do this is this much, and it's all these different agencies also having to spend the officer and administrator's time talking and putting this information together.
Right, but it's so much more effective than just traditional investigative work that has like really taken cases off-roading, right?
Right.
Because they weren't ever following the evidence. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah. Yeah. So we know who committed the 1991 Austin yogurt shop murders, and that's Robert Eugene Brashers. Did you have anything else on this one right now? This is one that's going to come up again for me because I'm going to go digging through him and Kenneth McDuff again because I remember like having some thoughts on Kenneth McDuff, not related to this, but he came up in the middle of it.
Right, because he had tried to confess to it, right? But
Right.
Robert Eugene Brashers had never come up. He was completely off the map with regard
Right.
to the yogurt shop murders. He came to light because he is this guy was a true loser predator, right?
Correct.
He committed a lot of different types of crimes that are catching up with him now, essentially, or
Yeah.
within the past, I don't know, 10 years or something. But it's a little alarming. But he is one of those, he's a true boogeyman.
Yeah, he's a boogeyman. He was born in 1958. By the time the yogurt shop murders came along in 1991, he would have been early 30s. So kind of peak serial killer.
Well, right. He committed suicide in 99, though. So he was, 41 years old when he died?
He was 40. He would have been 41 in March, and he killed himself in January. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And so that's also sometimes the trend, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen more and more of that over the years. There are a handful of serial killers that have been killed by victims or police or by suicide. And he is a true serial killer.
Right. And he never he never even realized that he had left anything behind to identify him.
Yeah. So what made this interesting to me and what made it rare, and then this is really all I have on this, is it is so unusual to see a case like this where someone has been convicted, and then not only have they been convicted, their conviction is overturned. They are denied compensation because the impression that's left is they did it. We just can't prove it well enough to like take it back to court. And there is some of this other evidence that makes it murky. They're denied compensation because they did not prove they didn't do it. And that all wraps up by 2010. Because like they're essentially the charges are dropped in 2010, and 15 years after that, we find out that not only did these 4 kids have nothing to do with it, including the 2 that were convicted, it was really a serial killer all along. That is astronomically rare.
It really is. Yeah, it really is, because I don't know that I ever would have discounted it as a actually, I knew it was going to be a stranger or like not an acquaintance. I couldn't say like they had never crossed paths before. He may have been in the yogurt shop at some point, right? But I don't know that I would have thought this was a serial killer. But I don't know that I would have discounted it either. But it really does show a lot that all of that occurred, right?
Yeah, I had trouble with it from the perspective of it being for like 15, 16-year-old kids. That's like, it's not unheard of for like teenagers to commit really brutal crimes. But some of the things that happened here in terms of the fire being set and the way the gunshots were done and them being tied up, it's another one of those things that like it really is astronomically rare to see that type of disorganized organization in teenagers.
Well, not to mention, like, part of the docuseries I watched revealed how far-fetched it was to, because they were young and because of just, I don't know, their personalities or something. Like, it was such a stretch to think that these, like, 4 kids could have done this, because, like, I don't even know that they could have, like, organized their way out of a brown bag.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And you know, you've got this pretty, now granted, from what I see about Robert Eugene Brasher's, he doesn't seem to be too far off from not being able to organize his way out of a brown bag. But he was older, and
He's on the other side of the spectrum, though, because like, so no matter how you look at teenagers committing crimes like this, they have to be at the beginning of their criminal career to some degree.
right, because they're only
He's
teenagers.
right, but he's ultimately at the end of his. Like his criminal career may go on for a few more years, and like I totally understand that like he has the double homicide in 1998, which is going to be 7 years after this.
Well, so it's
But
almost like peak, right?
yeah, he peaked, and now like he's unraveling and he's making mistakes and it's getting messier.
But ultimately, when he committed, now granted, I think it's interesting that he committed suicide when he came into contact with law enforcement about a stolen plate, right?
Yeah,
He thought the jig was up,
he did. Yeah,
and he lived for 6 days.
yeah.
And I would like to know if anybody thought, hey, why did this dude do that? We
Kill
should probably,
himself.
yeah, like, why did he kill himself? Like, because we were asking about a stolen vehicle plate.
That's a good question. I don't have an answer.
Well, what I was going to say is I'd be interested to know if they thought that, right? Because there's no reason to get all bent out of shape in that particular situation. Grand Theft Auto is a whole thing, but it's not like multiple murders, right?
Right.
And so to me, I think that he was overreacting.
Oh, he was definitely overreacting. I mean, he's got a number of things going on here that are interesting to me. He throws the gun away in the Wilkerson case, but he still has this little 22 revolver, which makes me wonder what that was to him. It's got to be something in the family for him to still have that weapon from the night of the yogurt shop murders, which makes me think that whatever the 38 or 380 was at the scene at the yogurt shop, that must be the first gunshot, and then the 22 is his backup because something happened with the 38, or he didn't have enough ammo, or something jammed on it, or something, and we end up using that 22. But my guess is the overreaction is now I'm caught. I've got this 22 on me, and this 22 links to these other crimes. That I think would make me more paranoid if I were him.
Was
And
it so in 1999? Like, would that have gone through his head? Like, oh,
maybe
the
ballistics was a
ballistics.
huge thing. Yeah,
Okay.
like ballistics was on every episode of Law and Order at the time. They were always checking ballistics and matching things. Way more, it was a like modern media concept than it was a reality, particularly with the difference in jurisdictions. Unless he had committed some other crime nearby the location he was at, it was unlikely. At the state level, he would have had maybe one or two things that would have popped. But really and truly, I think I'm calling him out for overreacting on things that were probably more media inventions than reality of law enforcement.
Right. But I have a feeling that, I mean, I feel like he would have had a guilty conscience no matter how
Oh,
much
yeah.
of a,
Yeah.
because he was clearly a cold blooded murderer. He went on and on and on. And it's interesting that I just wonder if the people who showed up to ask about the tag were like, okay, let's see what this dude has done.
Well, it turned into like a hostage situation. Also, the reason he lives for 6 days is tied to that 22 caliber revolver as well, because that is a terrible gun to try and kill yourself with. You can't do the damage. You cannot do the damage needed to commit suicide with most 22 caliber revolvers without a very particular type of ammunition that it does not appear this gentleman was carrying.
Right, and you also have to keep in mind that that's how the girls were shot.
Correct.
And it makes me hope they didn't suffer.
Yeah, I think a lot of serial killers end up going out the way, because that's the weapon they have on hand. Whatever they have right there, whether they strangle themselves or exsanguinate themselves or like shoot themselves, like it's what they had right there. That is not exactly true with how they like carry out their crimes if they're more organized, but a lot of them, like, they go out the way that they've been sending people out. This is a terrible dude. Robert Brashers is. I hope those people had an inkling that he was more than he seemed to be that day. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that it is fascinating to me that this is now solved. This is like one of the big murders that I've wondered about through the years. It has a lot of twists and turns to it, and by all accounts, he's the one. And I think they've matched his DNA. They have his bullet at the scene from the same gun. And I just find it fascinating.
Yep. And so that has been solved after all these years.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.